Welcome to the Embodiment podcast. This show is for you if you see the body as more than a brain taxi. It's for people interested in coming home to the body as a holistic aspect of who we are and how we live. Episodes contain practical tips, exercises you can take away, and interviews with embodiment specialists from around the world. I'm your host, Mark Walsh. On the show today, we have Chris Gladwell. So Chris is a very experienced yoga teacher, originally from a Ashtanga background, but has done all sorts of things since, Tantra and all kinds of things. I think he'll tell us about it. He's the author of one of my favorite yoga books called Engaged Yoga. That's required reading for all the embodied yoga principle students, and a bunch of other books too. Chris, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Mark.
So what was the start of your journey with the body? How did you get interested in the body?
Yeah, it's called birth, mate. It's called birth. As a youngster, I was a runner, fell runner. So I got into fell running. I lived up north. So I got into fell running and would run for miles, literally miles, up and down hills. So that was kind of the beginning for me. And then joined the TAVR parachute regiment. Really got into fitness in a big way. It was kind of very martial, should we say?
So with the paras running up and down hills,
jumping over airplanes. Weapons training, all sorts of stuff like that.
And yoga? Seems that now, how did you get from there to yoga? Now I'm curious about that.
Got into martial arts, actually. Martial arts was the next route. Quite a lot of background in martial arts, which was powerful. And then body work and yoga. And I got into yoga primarily because I had such a bad accident. I had a bilateral prolapsed disc and I couldn't walk. There was a lot of pain, not much help from the doctors, and started doing stuff that felt right, kind of healing it. Felt like I was doing that, and it got better. And the stuff I'd been doing, somebody showed me some pictures, and it was yogasana. So that was kind of my entry into it.
Okay, so you sort of reinvented the wheel, as it were.
Something like that, yeah. Something
cool.
Like that.
And
whatever it was, it worked. So it was good.
And you thought, this is good. This works.
It's good shit.
There's so many people we've had on the show have had like an injury or a life crisis, and then it's like that's the start. Then they go, wow, this is really helpful for me. Maybe it's going to be helpful for other people. And then, like, what was your kind of yoga education after that? Because you've been around a while. I know you've done a lot of stuff, but can you give us that in brief?
Iyengar was my first point of call, actually. I spent some time practicing Iyengar yoga in London, and then from there I met some orange-clad people. Who actually really inspired me a lot. And I worked with them for about 12 years and have a funky Indian name, which I don't use. This is a good one. And so I spent about 12 years in that school with my teacher, one-to-one, and then got into Ashtanga as well and worked with Patabi Joyce in Mysore back in the old days, in the small shala in Mysore and stuff like that for a while. But I did about 12 years of that and other stuff as well, like Oki yoga and all sorts of different things. And at the same time, I've been studying body worker, so I'm a shiatsu practitioner. I'm shiatsu for about 16 years, and Thai yoga massage, and I'm a structural body worker as well with anatomy trains people. It's kind of like Rolfing, and lots of other stuff. Feldenkrais. I mean, loads of stuff. I just.
Yeah, you're a body person generally, aren't you? I don't just want to put you in the camp of like, as a yoga teacher.
Body mind. I mean, things. I'm a hypnotherapist and psychotherapist. I've done all sorts of other stuff like that as well. So I've got that mind angle, which I really, really like, and yoga psychology and stuff I'm fascinated by. So it's kind of like a lot of different things,
Okay, what's your understanding of what is yoga now? So if someone says to you, this hot topic, what is yoga? How would you answer that?
In one sentence? You want one sentence?
As you like.
Okay. It's strategies, process, and goal, basically.
That's an interesting definition. I've never heard it quite that way before. Strategies, process, and goal.
Yeah.
You want to break that down a bit for us?
Well, strategies is methods. It's methods of practice. And the idea of the methods is they lead you to a particular, and would take you into a particular process which has an outcome. Yeah. And so the methods are at their best, because at their worst, they're just a waste of time. They're just something to fill in time. Something to fill your life up, and make you feel good, which is nothing wrong with that. That's great. Something to make you feel spiritual and good about yourself and that kind of thing, or whatever. But I think the traditional understanding of methods, and again, I don't think there's been applied particularly successfully in lots of what one might call yoga traditions, are to wake the fuck up.
Yeah, so that's the goal. So you the goal of yoga is waking up, and sort of there's all kinds of methods that lead to that.
Yeah, that's right. basically. And then we go into what is waking up and that kind of thing. But,
yeah, it's a tricky one, isn't it? In terms of like if someone was here and they weren't coming from, so I was taking my shoes off because they're uncomfortable. I know how you feel about shoes the same way as I do, I think. But how would you say what that is? Like waking up. So the common sense person might say, "Well, I'm awake." What do you mean by that? Is that a metaphor? What do you mean?
It's a metaphor to a degree. Yeah, it's. I really like. Do you know Ken Wilber's work?
Yeah.
Yeah, I love Ken Wilber's work. I think he's cool. I've read everything he's written, just about, I think. And he's got a level of embodiment where he talks about centauric levels of embodiment, right? Which is where your body-mind is one cohesive unit entity, one flow. And you know that from your awareness structures, how integrated that is. And that's a centauric level of development, which is a kind of precursor to, and a precursor requirement, I guess, to ego dissolution, really. And ego dissolution is a process of revealing the self-story, making the self-story transparent.
Mm-hmm. So this might be quite different for the average person going into a gym to do yoga, or going to their sort of friendly, Ashtanga class or Iyengar class at the Buddhist center or whatever. Yoga's gone in some interesting directions in recent times, hasn't it?
Yes, that's right.
What's your view on the yoga leggings and beer yoga, and there's all sorts of things out now, right?
It's fun. Yeah, I think yoga's great. I think it's great the fact that it's reaching out into the world. Like I was saying, when I started, it was a weird thing to do. Only complete and utter strange people did yoga.
Yeah.
You wouldn't find a class. There was no classes. I mean, it's funny old world, really. Because when I grew up, there were no supermarkets, no computers. So the kind of things we take for granted. And again, then when I started doing yoga, it was difficult to find.
Yeah.
So it's kind of interesting times. I like it. I like the fact that it's something in the name of yoga is available and free, and people can get access to teachings and practices and stuff like that. And of course, it's massively diluted and massively changed in a state of evolution, which is a good thing. That's a really good thing. And if you look at, I hurt my body so badly.
Yeah.
In various traditional, and traditional, whatever you can deconstruct that word so successfully, can't you? Various practices in the way that they were taught. So my teachings come out of understanding how not to do that, how to work well with human bodies. And a lot of my study has been to understand human bodies and minds, so that I don't want people coming to work with me and then walking away hurting or walking away feeling unhappy in any way. That's kind of crazy. That's not the aim.
Yeah. And what does your practice look like now then? So if people went on, say, a retreat with you for a week, and they just come back from Cyprus, being on one, what are the kind of main activities you're doing? You're doing asana, you're doing pranayama. Give us. I've only done a couple of your classes at Buddhafield, so give us a taste of what methods you find helpful.
I do somatic practice, body-based practice, which is I use asana, I use other stuff. So it's a kind of different way of working it. I don't, as far as I'm concerned, overstretching the body is a bit stupid. It's not healthy for the fascial tissues. So hanging out in long stretches and, going for the stretch, which is what a lot of yoga classes and teachings seem to do, is not very good for you. It's not long term. It's not good for your body. It's going to hurt by the time you're 55. The kind of pushing you get in classes where people are pushing into shapes, again, that hurts eventually. So trying to find ways that are sustainable, so that as we age and we can stay strong, and I like using the word optimal function. So the physical practice is to find optimal function. As far as I'm concerned, that's a mental event as well. I do meditation. I teach meditation, and I teach relational work, shadow work, mantra, working with vibration. There's various different ways of working with that. Lots of different aspects to practice. Body work. We do body work. So shared body work. Lots of stuff.
I mean,
it's all around body-mind integration, and on a relational level. So we're in relationship with other people because we're not separate.
Yeah. That's one thing I think is often missed from yoga classes, that it is relational. There's no getting away from that. Even if it's, and I wonder if some of the sort of abuses and scandals that have come from yoga have come from not looking at the relational side, or not acknowledging that there's power dynamics, or there's the relational side exists. I know one of the things we had a quick email exchange ahead of this call, and one of the things we talked about was like, who can you trust? So, if what supposed lineages are actually fairly modern, they don't go back thousands of years. And there's a lot of stuff out there. And as you say, much of it has perhaps been diluted, and there's potentially physically quite harmful practices out there. I certainly know a lot of yogis who have been injured or had, I guess, more like not so much single injuries, but like overuse injuries, like doing the same movement every single day in the same way and just hurting themselves. So it's like, how does someone in the modern yoga supermarket make decisions as to who to train with? And there's so many techniques that could be effective, and some of them could be damaging.
Yeah. And one of the things I say to students is ask the teacher why.
Why what? Sorry, why there?
Ask the teacher why. Why do you do it like this?
Oh, I see. Right.
So there's
like
this? Ask questions.
Yeah.
Ask lots of questions. And if the teacher can't come up with a cohesive and rational answer, then pay attention to that.
Yeah, I never like that answer in Aikido or anything else when people say, well, this is just the way we do it. And I'm like, yeah, but why? And
yeah, but why? Why should do it like that?
What's the rationale here?
Does it feel good for your body? Doesn't it feel nice? Does it? The other thing is actually, as far as I'm concerned, yoga should feel good.
There are some supposedly traditional shapes that I just do and it just feels horrible. And some of them I thought, okay, maybe this is me just, I'm a beginner, I need to practice this. Yeah. And 5-10 years later, they still feel awful. And I'm at a point now where, sort of having done yoga on and off for 20 years, I'm just like, if it feels bad after all that time, maybe it's not me that's wrong. Do you know what I mean?
Well, this is the thing. I think that, I agree with you entirely. I think the thing is the forms should fit the person, not the other way around. Yeah. And I think what we've got in it, when people find something that really seems to work for them, they think it's applicable for everybody.
Yeah,
and it's not. And you've got to find what is uniquely applicable for your body type, for your mental type, for your emotional state, for your context, for the time of your life, for everything else like that. And when it works, and you kind of know it works. And one of the reasons why you know it works is because actually it feels like you're coming home.
Yeah, there's that feeling of like, oh yeah, and sometimes there's the initial kind of like grinding off the dust a little bit, but that's a different feeling, isn't it? I've learned to recognize when it's like, okay, this is uncomfortable because it's a new practice, or, I was training last night Aikido and I hadn't trained in a while. So a few things were a little sorer than normal, but, I knew that if I did this for a couple of weeks again regularly, then that'd be aside and I'd be enjoying it again. It's a different feeling. And
the developmental discomfort or something like that, isn't it? There's a developmental
that's a different.
But you kind of know that, and this is one of the things I think people are aiming to find if they haven't already got that experience. Which there's the difference between that kind of developmental discomfort. You're on challenge. There's a difference between that and the kind of grubby.
That's a nice word.
It's a grubby feeling of trying to
just
put stuff into some box that this particular body just doesn't want to go into.
Grubby is the perfect word for that feeling. There's certain postures I just go, this is just grubby. It doesn't feel good, and I'm being compressed, and I can't breathe. And and some of that's just anatomical, right? Like aside from all the other sort of personality factors, there are some just physical. I have short legs, a little bit of a belly. The way my legs are structured, like certain postures just like crush my testicles. It's like I'm not going to be convinced that's good for me.
Yeah. No, certainly have to lift them out of the way in some of the postures, don't you? But it's like, or whatever, yeah.
Scoop and tuck.
There's, I agree. Totally agree. And a lot of it is anatomical. I mean, again, on the courses I do, like I said, I've been teaching anatomy for about 25 years. So, and again, body work and that kind of thing. So one of the things we do is we look at different anatomy types and understand how to offer things and how to work with people according to their anatomical type. And if you've got long spine and short long bones, your arm bones and leg bones are short, there's things like wrapping in asanas. It's just not going to be pleasant.
Yeah, I tried to do a bind the other day, and it just ended up pulling a muscle. And I was like, I was around all these skinny, lithe young girls in a vinyasa class, and they were doing the binds, and then the ego comes in. It's like, oh, I can do that. No, you've got a completely different body, completely different age, different gender from all the people around me, and the comparison just doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, that's another thing. It's another thing. Don't compare anything. Don't compare anybody with anybody or anything with anything. There's a lovely old expression that comparison is the thief of joy.
That's nice. What is it in Shakespeare about comparisons are odious? That's the Shakespeare, I believe, isn't it?
Yeah.
So how does one, in terms of choosing a good teacher or differentiating practice? So obviously, you said you can ask why. If they can give a good answer to that, that's helpful. Any other sort of tips on that?
Well, you mentioned the feelings. I mean, you use the feelings in your body.
Yeah.
Your body's right. That's the other thing, is your body's right. You know, whatever's going on, it's right, because it's you know, if something's not appropriate, you know, it may be that something you could grow in towards, working towards something over time. I mean, I've seen classes. I was teaching in Germany. I went into a space in Germany, and there was the class I went to. This guy, and he was having people throw themselves against the wall in handstand, and somebody fell and broke their arm, and somebody else injured themselves because of the kind of requirements he was making on people. It's absolutely crazy, right?
Wow.
Real world way, but it was very spiritual. You know, it was a very spiritual class, and you do these things and you get extra merits in heaven and that kind of thing. You know, that's kind of
Yeah, it sounds like abuse to me.
yeah, sounds like abuse to me as well. But where was I going with this? Your body knows. So it may be that you could do handstands if you worked with, you know, particular approaches. One of the words I do like from the yoga tradition is krama. Kramic approach. Krama is a developmental step. So you know, if you understand the principle of krama and you can work with developmental steps, then it's possible with a certain number of steps that you could possibly do something, maybe in a year's time or 2 years' time or whatever it is, or 4 years' time. But to try and do it now because some teacher tells you to, because your ego tells you to, is just silly.
Yeah.
So it's acknowledging where you are at in yourself and in your body and what's real in this moment. And again, your body knows. Your body's going to tell you, because it's going to say yuck, or it's going to say, yeah, interesting.
I think, you know, there's something more fundamental at work here, isn't there? On the one hand, two things, you know, that are really important here. Like, one, as soon as we ask students to relate to their own bodies, we give them authority there. And they're saying, look, you're the boss of you. And we're encouraging the somatic sense of actually feeling rather than bowing down before an authority figure, whether that's you as a teacher or the form or whatever it is. And that's, I think there's something more fundamental in giving students options, as well as the sort of just intelligent steps, you know, to, you know, let's say, right, you want to do a handstand, well, there's, you know, 4 things you can do before that. It also kind of gives them back authority and says, look, you're in charge of you make decisions over you, and please do feel your own body to decide that. And in a way, that's a more useful teaching than the handstand, right? The teaching of feel and be the boss of yourself.
Yes, it is. And ideally, working with kramas and working with approaches to deeper levels of embodiment, which can be offered and people can be guided into that, are serve that principle, I would say, of empowerment.
Nice. And yeah, I'd say
the overall principle is one of people of empowerment.
Yeah.
And all the kramas and the processes then serve that principle.
Yeah, that's the kind of fundamental thing. And having those the kramas and processes, and, you know, things like a student can rest, or if the student doesn't have to do what the teacher says, that's part of the methodology which leads to that empowerment. And I feel very sad when I see that missing, you know, and just from physical danger point of view, but, you know, it's sociological as well, right? It's teaching conformity. It's teaching a way of being, which is perhaps not so helpful in the modern world.
There's enough of that.
Yeah, why don't we
need rebellion is what's needed, not conformity.
So let's bring that in, because one thing I like about your book and, well, the Engaged Yoga book and, you know, your lessons is you're bringing in that bigger picture. So you bring in kind of ecology and nature. You know, some people might say, what the hell has yoga got to do with ecology or with capitalism or with any of these sort of systems and structures? How do you tie in these bigger systems?
How do you not tie them in? I mean,
well, most people don't, Chris. So, like, I'm playing devil's advocate here. You know, I'm on your team with this one, but it's like someone comes to you and say, "Look, I'm a yogi. I'm pretty flexible. I'm into mindfulness. You know, I meditate. You know, not someone shallow, but just someone that's just mainstream yoga." And how would you tie in these bigger systems?
It's interesting, isn't it? Because I mean, the again, if you look at the I'm going to use the word tradition here, not in terms of the styles of practice, but if you look at the broad Vedic meme, you know, the whole Vedic culture, and if you look at the sort of, you know, the way we define our language, and one of the complexities of our language is simply that we nounify everything. We turn things that are actually verbs, they're processes. internet, like body, and mind, and me,
Yeah.
and house, or whatever it is. Actually, they're all verbs. And the house is a crumbling pile of sand, and it will be sand eventually, whatever it is, whatever shape it currently occupies. And before that, it was rock. This body is food, and everything I've thought and done and felt and eaten and everything else. It's all process. And what we do is we turn all those processes into nouns and actually believe them. And it's kind of what we've got to do to manage in the world. But
it's convenient.
Sorry?
Convenient, but not ultimately real to say this is
really
the house, but actually, as you say, it's a process.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. And so we do that. But I mean, in the Vedic culture, what they've got, and other systems have this as well, they have an overarching concept, a meta concept, which is joined upness. Everything's joined up and flowing. Yeah. So those nouns are held within an overarching concept or overarching meta concept of flow and joined upness. And they have words for that. It might be Brahman or Prana, which are not sort of belief systems. They're not religions. They're just overarching meta concepts within which everything else fits. So, and what's happened with languaging and practice, yoga practice in the Western world, is we've lost those overarching meta concepts to a huge degree, which tell us that, first of all, the first recognition is that everything's inseparable, and the second recognition, and seamless and flowing, and the second one is that, as an entity, your particular neurological experience is going to terminate, and everything's related to everything else. I mean, if you look at somebody like, if you look in the sort of Vedic tradition, if you find characters like Vivekananda. Vivekananda was quite interesting. He's one of the characters who brought yoga to the Western world, and I think turned Queen Victoria onto Bang Lassie for men, from what I hear.
I don't know what that is.
It's a cannabis-based infusion for menstrual pain and stuff like that. It's used medically in various ways, or was. But Vivekananda had this whole social thing. I'm sure he had his shadows as well, but basically he was saying, there's no point in teaching people about religion until you feed them. If people are hungry, then you have to do something about that. It's kind of basic stuff, really. And in a lot of ways, I've spent a lot of time reading yoga texts. I like yoga texts. I'm fascinated by them. So I've spent a lot of time reading and studying them. And a lot of them are social transformation. They're pro-social documents. Caste system's not good. We need to do something about it. People are starving. Why are some people starving and some people hungry? I beg your pardon. Why are some people starving and some people overfed and have too much? What's going on here? This is not an equitable system. It's not a workable system. And again, in those overarching meta concepts, one of them is lokaha samastaha sukhino bhavantu. Lokaha samastaha sukhino bhavantu, which means may all beings, without exception, in all realms, wherever they find themselves, find auspiciousness, joy, awakening, comfort, ease, etc., and that kind of thing. So that, if you start to take those kind of things seriously, and therefore yoga seriously, because again, you go into the Bodhisattva type tradition from Mahayana Buddhism, and Buddhism, I think, of a style of yoga, really. It's yoga. In
that it's a practice system leading to awakening.
Yeah, exactly. It's a system of methods. Buddhism is a religion of method. And the religious aspect, the belief system aspect, is that actually that people are pretty decent things. If you go into the core of any human being, underneath all their pain, difficulties, strange behaviors, and everything else, there's a good, kind, reasonable being in there just waiting to come out. And the basic belief, because that's a belief. You can't prove that. So that's a belief. So that's the sort of belief essence of Buddhism, and that's about it. And everything else is, you get sort of folk religion built up around, Buddhas and stories and mythology. But the essence of the religion is that. And the rest of it is methods.
And so I get that there's a kind of philosophical frame here of, things are all connected and things are all process. Yeah. So again, let's make this even more concrete. What does that look like in a yoga class? How does that, what it was specific, yes, there are these philosophical texts saying, we should have equality or whatever it is, but how does it link into modern postural yoga?
That's how we link it in. What you make of it. This is the evolution. This is the evolution of the yoga practice. Is that, you haven't got a body without ecology. It's really simple. There is no physical flesh without food. One of the posts I put up on Facebook recently was there was a piece of research done in Germany, in the forests in Germany, not in the urban centres, in the wild places, and they found there's been a 76% decline in flying insect population in the last 27 years. That's quite interesting, that is, because everything that we eat, apart from grasses, is facilitated by pollinating insects.
The bees die, we all die, right?
It's not just the bees, it's all the pollinating insects, but yes, it's basically that. And the fact that there's been a 76% decline should be of interest, and that's down to neonicotinoid pesticides. So that's down to those companies, the 4 companies, which, by the way, are Syngenta, Bayer Monsanto, Nippon Soda, and Sumitomo Chemical, if anybody's interested. And their addresses are I'll put up on the Facebook post. So if anyone wants to contact them, let them know about neonicotinoid pesticides, they can do that. Because what you're talking about is those companies, all of which are multi-billion pound industries, hundreds of billions of pounds. One of the ownership companies that owns Bayer Monsanto is a trillion dollar business, absolutely massive. And what it comes down to is money, and it comes down to profit, and it comes down to profit being more important than people or planet. And so your yoga class, your person in that yoga class, their body, what they're wearing, and whether they eat or not is completely dependent on the bees and those companies that are making decisions that transform or affect our planet. And if you can pull your yoga practice out of that context, I'll be fascinated to see that, but I very much doubt if you can.
So you're placing that yoga context within the reality of interdependence. Yeah,
it is placed within that. And that's not a philosophical stance. It's, you can say, well, there's a philosophical stance. No, it isn't. It's just breathe in, breathe out, start looking at the food you eat, that kind of thing. Everything connects.
So you're bringing awareness to how people do food, how people do money, how people do relationships. It's much bigger than what most people might think of as yoga.
Maybe. Maybe.
And I'm for that. I'm fully supporting that. As you say, breathe in, there's your relationship to ecology. It's not far away from you.
That's right. Yeah.
And, if someone's listening to this, maybe they're like on the subway in New York, or they're walking through the streets of London, or they're in a taxi in Moscow, like what's the practice for that person? Like the person, I always like to give things to the people listening to the podcast. It's like,
feel the seeds under the pavement. Feel the seeds just waiting underneath the pavement.
Nice. And the breath
practice. The wild is just waiting to burst through all those cities. It's
That's
just underneath your feet.
A nice image, huh? It's there. I always find it slightly strange that we have paved our world. I was just walking in the park today, but even on the way to the park, there's a tree sort of burst through the pavement, and the pavement's kind of falling aside to let this tree through.
Yeah, so I was a country boy, so I lived a long time in London, and then still live in a city at the moment. But I was a country boy originally, and it's like one of the things that held me in one of my psychologically stressed places when I was in London was something that really struck me, and that was seeing a little fragile green dandelion leaf breaking through the new tarmac, and the power of that leaf, that I could just tear with my hands, pushing through this, construction.
Yeah,
tarmac out of construction. It's just like kind of beautiful.
Yeah. There's a way in which it kind of all looks very solid, but it's quite fun watching these documentaries about, if humans disappeared, how long would it take for the trees to take over things? And, it's like 10 years later, 100 years later, and it's not long before it's all covered up again.
No, that's right. Yeah. But I think we're in very, very interesting times. And, one of the things I talk about a lot is readdressing our relationship with nature. Well, we are nature. I think of cities as termite mounds, and they just glorified termite mounds. We've brought all the sand together and making these great big piles and joined it together with sticky stuff and made these immense structures and these ways of communicating. It's glorified termite mounds, and we're still held within the web of nature. We are nature, and we've got some distorted visions of who we are. We believe we're in charge. We believe the planet is for us, and we're somehow separate from everything else. And my understanding is that yoga and the practice of yoga can play a very, very big role in facilitating a shift of consciousness for people to see and to readdress how we are and who we are on the planet. We don't have a lot of time to do that. Kind of playing the edges here a little bit, I think.
And
I'm a scientist. I was trained as a scientist, so I was a biologist. So you've got, I read The New Scientist, and I look a lot at what's going on in climate science and ecology and stuff like that. And if you don't, then you won't be aware quite as much of what's going on. But it's kind of really interesting times. It's kind of edgy. We need to be
on the edge of catastrophe for sure. And anyway, we've been that way for a while with the kind of Cold War and the potential nuclear destruction. And as soon as that faded, it kind of is more the ecological destruction. And I've spoken to scientists that have said, no, it's already too late. There's nothing you can do. Others that have said, well, it's the next few years. It's going to decide. It's mixed opinions, but certainly none of them are particularly optimistic. And
I think it's a flavour of Earth optimism coming through at the moment, which is about, well, the fact is that if you're not optimistic, we kind of need to be optimistic, because part of what's going to change things is our collective and concerted optimistic efforts to make a difference. We did it with the ozone level.
Yeah, I mean, that has to be at anything, doesn't it? Like if you say we're going to put a man on the moon, the first thing is to say, okay, this is possible. This is something we can do, And, as you say, there are success stories like the ozone level. And in terms of how the body relates to this, for me, it's if I'm feeling my own body, I'm aware of the environment I'm in more. And it just becomes intolerable to be in, the more embodied I am, the more I want to be in pleasant parks and by the sea, and the less I want to be in unpleasant environments, polluted environments. And that interdependence starts to become more obvious. The kind of violence that's done in my name starts to become more obvious.
Yeah, I think so. I think the body does the body becomes, as you become more aware of internal experience, when awareness appears in your intestines, or you find I don't talk about creating consciousness in the body, or creating awareness. It's not like that in my experience. So what I talk about is finding awareness. You're finding the already existence. So you're uncovering what was already there. Your intestines have a deep level of sentience and awareness, and the fact that you have been switched off from them for so long is of interest, maybe, or whatever else it is that you're not been paying attention to and not feeling. But that doesn't mean that feeling hasn't been there. And awareness in the body is in feeling. And the more you feel fully into what's happening in the physical structures of the body, and the emotions that move through those structures, and how those relate to your thoughts, and the joined upness of that whole thing that we are. Mm-hmm. The more we feel into that, the more sensitive we become, and the more, I believe, we are aware of our ecology, because we get into that relation. We've got those internal relationships, and they directly translate into external relationships.
So it's all what you've been saying here. You're saying is it's all relationship, and that primary relationship in a way is with ourselves. And once we have that, we're more able to have other kinds of relationships more fully. And one is with the planet, as you say. So let's talk a little bit about intimate relationships. I know you're interested in sexuality, this idea that yoga makes you sexier. Deep intimacy as well. Like, let's talk a little bit about that. That could be juicy as we move towards the close.
I think as soon as I start teaching yoga, I have to with any authenticity, to talk about uprightness. Vertical core. We have to talk about the pelvic floor. The pelvic floor is fundamental to standing upright. And as soon as you get into the pelvic floor, you get into the history of shame with which religions have riddled humanity. The name of the pubic bone in Germany is the Schambein, the bone of shame. The pudendal nerve pudendus comes from the Latin word pudere, which is for shame. So the very names of those anatomical structures around the pelvis we've called shameful. And to get into any intimacy in a good way, all that shame has to be uninstalled from the system. One of the opposites people do in some of the neo-tantra words is go jump straight into shamelessness as a way to try and sort that out, and that's probably just as messy. But finding that place of ease and comfort with our sexual function, I think yoga can really help us again as we find more and more awareness in the body. I think it also gets juices moving in a good way. It gets you, joins up. And you can so much on sexuality in yoga is immense. I mean, you get a thing where sexuality in the Western world is left. Sexual education in the Western world is left to pornographers. It's left to people whose heart and genitals are rather fragmented, certainly not joined up in a clear way, as I would understand it. So when we leave sexual education of our young people to people who are relatively dissociated in that kind of way, I would say that's an interesting culture to be in. Why is there nothing more supportive, kind, aware, beautiful for those young people to come into? So I think yoga's got a big role to play again, potentially, in liberating us from the sexual histories we have of shame and abuse
And then, I've noticed in the yoga community, there can be a slightly almost bulimic relationship to sexuality, that on the one hand, as soon as people come into their bodies, they feel well, they feel horny, everyone looks beautiful at the yoga festival. It's Buddha Field Day 3, the sun is shining, we've all been doing yoga, people are hooking up with each other. And then on the other hand, there is this sort of still like repressive kind of shame body kind of side of it that's still there in yoga, this kind of like all spiritual transcendence, like, to use Wilber's phrase, to transcend but not include that. So people pretending they're above sexuality, and that's not something they need or not feelings they have, and they're super spiritual, and they end up abusing all their students. Like this
that's right.
weird relationship.
I say to people, there are three things you can do with sexuality as a yoga practitioner, okay? 3 things, and 3 things only, as far as I figured out. And one is you can be celibate, but being authentically celibate means you don't even think about sex, and I don't like the word masturbate because it means to defile oneself. It's a stupid word. So you don't think about sex, you don't self-pleasure, you don't, it just doesn't happen. So celibacy is actually only available really for people with very, very, very low libido. And there are people who it works for as a way of finding love. And it works for short periods to find out about your sexual energy.
It's great as an experiment, isn't it? I think it's a really good experiment, at least for a period of time.
Yeah, that's it, yeah. But if you're not doing that, then you've got 2 other choices. One is to go into denial, and the other one is to explore it and find out about it. And I think that's the only 3 choices there are. And since since I'm not a monk, and I'm not going to be a monk, I'm not a monastic. And there are particular tracks of yoga where people think that monastic paths are somehow better. I don't believe that. Again, if you go into the yogic history, you find that all the originators of yoga, the rishis, are all householders with kids, out of interest.
So why is brahmacharya, this sort of sexual restraint, as it's usually translated? I know there's other ways to translate it. It's often considered kind of key or one of the main limbs.
Yeah, well, brahmacharya actually means mastery of the creative force. Acharya is mastery, and Brahma is the creative force. So it's mastery of the creative force. And so the approaches that allow you to do that for a period of time, celibacy is useful, as we just suggested, as an experiment. Yeah. But as a lifestyle, I don't think it gives you mastery of the creative force. It gives you suppression, repression, denial, ignoring, perversion of the creative force and everything else, as we see. So that's not it. It's not about celibacy. It's about understanding sexual energy and really working really very, very powerfully with it. And that's brahmacharya. To do that, yes, you have to have a certain continence. It's not about splurging your sexual energy all over the place in random festival orgies either. That's kind of not it. But again, that could be some part of someone's learning curve.
Yeah. And I do see a lot of kind of low-level repression of sexuality in yoga land, sort of, very healthy, sort of beautiful, particularly young women who it's like still denying that as something that's healthy. It's a mix. And this is a symptom of something bigger I see in yoga, is a mixture of values. You've got one value set coming from a kind of almost monastic kind of Eastern value set colliding with a kind of Christian-y, modern, Western consumerist value set. And it comes together in some odd combinations sometimes. Do you know what I mean by that?
Yeah, I know exactly what you mean. It's kind of messy. I think there's a misunderstanding of the yoga tradition. I'm using the word tradition. What do I say? There's a misunderstanding of the relationship between strands of yoga teaching, I believe. And one of the main strands we've got is what's called the sutric strand. And the sutric strand is about purity, and it is about not doing things that distract your mind. And there's a reason for that kind of practice, and it's a particular practice for a particular period of time in your life and for a particular outcome. Again, like we said, yoga is, process and goal and strategy, process, goal. So there's particular strategies around all these things that work, and processes and goals. So I think that mess is partly a misunderstanding of what's possible within yoga in terms of that strategy, process, goal approach. So it's just lots of messy confusion. I think people. I mean, one of the things is like if I've seen this in the Tibetan Buddhist world. I was involved in Vajrayana for a while, and I did about 9 years as an apprentice within Vajrayana line for a while. And it's a household line. They're quite interesting, juicy line, very interesting. And but you see this where in the yoga world, people look up to something that's ethnic and different.
Yeah, there's the exoticism, as you know, it's appealing, isn't it? That somehow it's exotic. That you know, if it's Tibetan and it's kind of gods involved and kind of things that people never have heard of, that could be quite attractive.
Yeah, but it is. But it's also it's very attractive, and it's very attractive as an ego bolstering strategy.
Mm.
You know, I don't feel very good in myself. I don't like my sexuality. I feel a bit ashamed of my vagina. I feel a bit ashamed of my cock. You know, I don't like these bits of me that much, really. And then they're confusing because they have these energies that I don't really understand. And, you know, and when I'm around people, I just feel like fucking someone. And I don't really know what to do with that kind of energy. And, where's my heart in this? You know, there's all this sort of stuff that has to be navigated and explored. And so it's much easier in a way to adopt some sort of nice ethnic sounding terms and a few ego bolstering strategies from another culture.
Yeah.
Without really looking into those and understanding what the fuck are about anyway.
It's a way of making yourself special and taking things that are difficult and putting them in a kind of box that might feel a bit safer.
Yeah. You're okay with swearing on this, aren't you?
Oh, fuck yeah. Don't worry.
Yeah,
that's all good. This is my show. Don't worry, Chris.
I mean, but it is. I think a lot of the stuff that goes on in Yoga Land is about, put it bluntly, spiritual ego.
And there is this purity thing, though, isn't there? Of like, you know, you have to eat certain foods, and of course, you know, mindful eating and ethically sourced. I get that, but it goes to a degree of sort of orthorexia in Yoga Land, and people, you know, can be really abusing themselves physically, abusing themselves with food, and abstaining to the point of sort of unhealthiness with relationships or work, strange relationships to money. You know, it's more spiritual to be poor. All those threads seem to me around sort of self-denial as a path. And I wonder if it's, as you say, a confusion of sort of another thread, maybe a more monastic thread that's not the householder path that most of us are in.
Yeah, I think so. And again, you read yoga history. There have been paths which have actively suggested all that stuff.
Mm.
You know, there are paths which suggest the body is not a good thing. You know, it's heaps of slime and pus, you know.
There's a strong body denying tradition, both in Buddhism and you hear it in Theravadan Buddhism, you know, like meditating on the disgust of the body is a traditional Theravadan practice.
Yeah, exactly. Meditate on the wonder of the body. You know, if you know, as a biologist, honestly, anybody who can go and look at the body and see it as a disgusting heap of slime or whatever, I just think, poor sad soul. I mean, just check it out for real. Just look at what's actually happening there. It is incredible.
That's something people can do listening to this, isn't it? Like to be as a body, to feel, but also to look at oneself as wondrous. You know, it's quite you know, if we saw, I don't know, I saw a really cool sports car this morning and I went by, cool car, you know, but you know, how much cooler, how much more intricate, how much better designed is a human body. The sports car doesn't heal itself when it has a dent in it. You know, it's if we related with ourselves as not an object, but as wondrous, I think that's quite a profound meditation.
Isn't it? Now, I teach meditation people, I talk about going into the internal geography of their experience. You know, and finding the landscapes inside of them, which are utterly beautiful. I mean, you can sit and look at a landscape, you know, where you cross the Sussex Downs, or where, you know, look out across the sea, or a beautiful sunset, or where you are. You know, I can find beautiful places where I can be in nature, and actually, your body is nature, and it's beautiful, and you get into the internal landscape of that through feeling and through the sort of internal, you know, introspection, the internal visioning of what's happening there, and it's profoundly beautiful, and everybody is.
Everyone can do it. You can be in an urban environment and still have access, you know, because you're there, you are nature, right? So it's like this mentality in an urban environment. If I have to go to nature, I have to go for a holiday in the Lake District, or I have to go to sit on a beach in India, because then I'll be in the nature. Then I'll be in the spiritual place, you know? Yeah. It's like, well, you are the same person, whether you're in London or New York or Moscow or the beautiful beach in Thailand. Yeah,
and stop paving things. Stop putting paving slabs on nature, for goodness sake. Stop it. It's enough. Yeah, it's enough. Enough fucking tarmac. Stop it.
Chris, we need to wrap up fairly soon. Any final message for people about the body? Hello, people.
Enjoy your body. Find out how it works. Find out how wonderful it is. Really, really enjoy it. You know, because it's magical. It's incredible.
And where can people find out more about you, Chris? So if people want to look at your books or seminars, where are they going to find you?
You find me on www.christophergladwell.com.
If you enjoyed this episode, subscribe to get more. If you'd like to help us build the Embodied Tribe, leave a review on iTunes or share this on your social media. If you're interested in training globally, sign up to receive the newsletter at embodiedfacilitator.com. Until next time, welcome home to the body.